Here's Golf to Go with Frank LaRosa.
Welcome in. This is the Golf to Go Radio Hour. I'm Frank LaRosa, welcoming in Ann Liguori. Ann is the owner, host, and executive producer of the award-winning Sports Interview. That's INNERVIEW, and we'll talk about that. Syndicated cable series and archive. She was the first female to host her own call-in sports talk show on WFAN in New York, the first all-sports radio station. She was also an original host of her own series on the Golf Channel. She's a trailblazer. Ann has covered 26 Masters, dozens of other major championships and tournaments, over 40 U.S. tennis championships, multiple Olympics, and a variety of other major sporting events. Winner of numerous industry awards. She's a tireless fundraiser for worthy charities. I don't know how she has time to be with us today, but welcome, Ann Liguori.
Frank, it's a pleasure to be on the show.
Thank
I started
you.
when I was 12. That's when you said 40 U.S. Opens. I started very young.
That's the only way any of us can do any of this. Your name has been familiar to me over the years as a sports fan, as we mentioned a little bit before we got recording here, your interviews of Ted Williams and Mickey Mantle and Wilt Chamberlain, a lot of the people that I grew up with, was always very exciting to me. So at some point in this interview, I'd like to talk about that as well. But you have written a book, and it looks like it's going to be a very successful book called Life on the Green: Lessons and Wisdom from Legends of Golf. There's a mouthful, but boy, that encompasses some great personalities and a wonderful foreword by your friend Jim Nance, and it's got to make you feel good that it's ready to go.
I am so excited about this book. I'm holding it in my hand right now, Frank. And, it took me 3 years to write the book. I had to interview all the legends in the book. I chose 12 legends, 6 men, 6 women. But even before that, getting the publishing deal, that's, quite the ordeal. And now, and then you edit it, of course, and now promoting it. So it's really been a project, and I'm very excited with the way it turned out. I feel it's very uplifting and positive, and in these divisive times in our society and in our sport, golf, unfortunately, there's been a lot of turmoil, and I wanted to write something very positive and very uplifting, and I think I achieved it. I asked these legends in golf to share life wisdom, what they learned from their iconic golf careers that they use in their day-to-day life. And oh boy, the wisdom applies to everyone, whether you're a golfer or not. And, they're universal themes. And I'm just so delighted that legends such as Jack Nicklaus and Gary Player and Ben Crenshaw and Tom Watson and Padre Carrington, Nancy Lopez, Jan Stevenson, Dottie Pepper shared their success stories with me and with the world, and shared their life wisdom.
As I kind of leaf through some of the things, I haven't had a chance to read the whole book yet, but I looked at a PDF of the book. There's when you mention the names, I mean, I even knew who was in the book because I obviously had seen the press release. But as you mention the names and they roll off your tongue, that's an impressive list of people who have been very successful, not only in their careers but in their lives as well. And as you mentioned, some of this advice is life lessons as well, and that's one of the things that I found most interesting.
Well, people ask me, why did I choose these particular 12 legends? They all are Hall of Famers in various Hall of Fames. Padre Carrington is, I believe, the youngest personality in the book, and he's getting inducted into the Hall of Fame, the Golf Hall of Fame, this year. So I'm thrilled about that. In fact, I just saw him at the Cognizant Classic here in the Palm Beaches, and was so thrilled that I could actually hand him the book instead of sending it to Ireland, right, where he is based, obviously. But they're all just iconic figures. They're older, and they can look back on their careers. Padraig's still playing, and so is Bernard Longer, 66 years young, and I just really chose personalities who are A, Hall of Famers, B, are positive role models, and had a lot to talk about from their legendary golf careers and life wisdom.
And the book certainly opens on a really high note with your friend, Mr. Jim Nance. I thought his foreword was written from the heart, and it certainly spoke a lot about who you are and your career and the effort that you put into to write this book.
I am so grateful to Jim. Just extraordinary. You know, I've known him for decades. I started my career as a production assistant, a freelance production assistant at CBS Sports. I think I was even there before Jim Nance started working for CBS. But I've known him through the years, covering the NFL and covering golf, and he's become just a wonderful friend. And boy, how gracious of him to write such a wonderful foreword. I just, I can't believe it. He's just such a nice man, as you know. He's just such a great role model. And yeah, I have sent him the book, so I can't wait to hear what he thinks.
You know, as in the introduction, I mentioned the title of your program, Sports Interviews, and that's spelled Innerviews. And I was always intrigued with that because when you take that word apart, obviously an interview is asking questions, and your kind of twist on the word is kind of looking inside folks, and hats off. That was really well done.
Thank you. Well, first of all, you know, it is an interview. I'm so interested in getting to know the personality and making he or she as comfortable as possible so that they tell me perhaps more than they would somebody else. Maybe you learn a little bit more that you've not read or heard before about the personality. And then I really worked hard to get legendary people on that show, Sports Interview, Frank. You know, my first show was back in 1989, the great Mickey Mantle. I was younger. I was in my 20s and 30s and going, you know, I was looking to book guests on the show who you were just icons in all different sports. Mickey Mantle was my first guest. Ted Williams, that was just an incredible experience for me to actually get the interview with Ted Williams. And then he's such a baseball genius. He opened up so much about the game, and that's a whole story. Each one of these interviews, whether it's Will Chamberlain or Billie Jean King or Annika or Hank Aaron or Bart Starr, there's stories behind the stories. So perhaps that would be my next book.
Well, you know, not only to have an interview with Ted Williams, but he didn't talk to very many people. So
As
that
you
was a
know,
compliment in
exactly.
itself.
Well, you know, let me tell you a quick story about that. I was playing golf at a great golf course in Central Florida called Black Diamond. And I had heard that the Ted Williams Museum was nearby and that John Henry lived nearby. And I was so determined to get an interview with Ted Williams, and my friend knew where John Henry lived. So I actually, after the round of golf, went to John Henry's house, knocked on the door, introduced myself to his wife, and told him all about my show, Sports Interview, and asked if he wasn't home at the time, but I asked his wife if I left my business card with her, and I asked her if she would have John Henry call me, the son. And sure enough, 2 days later, he called, and I asked if I could possibly sit down with his dad. And he said, "Are you around, you know, during the All-Star game in July when they went to Fenway? Remember that in the late
Oh, yeah.
90s?" And I said, "Absolutely." He said, "If you get your camera crew here at 11 a.m. at whatever hotel they were staying at in Boston, in Four Seasons on the square, and be ready to go, Ted will have just awoken from his nap." He was ailing back then. You know, he was up there and not well. John Henry was really reunited with his father and was taking care of him. But John Henry was so gracious. He said, "If you meet me and are prepared with the crew at 11 a.m., he'll come up, he'll be sharp, he'll have just awoken from his nap, and he'll be ready to go." And that's exactly what happened. And we're all set to go. The lights and camera and everything were you know, ready. And here comes Ted Williams, you know, this intimidating presence. Ted Williams. And, you know, he was a baseball genius. So it was just an honor to talk to him and to listen to him.
And that was, as you alluded to a moment ago, early in your career. Where did this all come from? I know sports was very important in your family as you were growing up, and you kind of played a few as well. But you know, how did this all kind of come together for you?
Oh, wow. Sport, interviewing and, I've always wanted to to do exactly what I'm doing now. I've always wanted to interview different personalities and, I've always been an athlete growing up, Frank, and I know I wanted to be a talk show host when I was 3 years old. I don't know how many people know they want to be a talk show host at 3, but was in Cincinnati where I was born, and I was raised in a little town called Brecksville, Ohio, outside of Cleveland. But when I was still in Cincinnati, my earliest recollection is being in a high chair, looking at a woman named Ruth Lyons, a true pioneer in the talk show genre on television. And she was interviewing the most fascinating personalities who came through Cincinnati. And that had such a profound effect on me, obviously. I remember it to this day. And I've always thought that that would be a cool thing to interview different personalities. So as an athlete growing up, I knew I would eventually marry my broadcasting career with my sports knowledge and my sports background. Not easy in the day for women in sports broadcasting back when I started right out of college in the early 80s, but I've always been very athletic and I've always loved sports. So thankfully I was able to marry the two.
Well, and being one of the first, especially in New York, and what the world was like, and certainly broadcast as well. That maybe they're more intimidated with you than you were with them, huh?
I don't think that was the case. All I can say is it was very near impossible to break into the field as a woman back then. It was very closed to women in sports broadcasting. And I'm just happy that I was able to break in and establish credibility early in my career. And, I really worked hard to do as much research, as much prep work as I could. I really felt I really needed to prove myself more than the guys back then, because there weren't really women doing that kind of work. So, there were ups and downs and lots of fun stories to tell, but I'm grateful that it all worked out.
So you thought, well, I suppose I could interview, some guy that works in the, in travel for some baseball team, but you decided Mickey Mantle be your first interview.
Exactly. I went for it, Frank. Actually, I just knew that I brought in the sponsors for this show as well, Sports Interview. At the time, MSG Network, who I pitched the show to, they had known of my work. They said, yes, we love your work. We can give you the airtime every week, but we can't pay you. So I was in my mid-20s. I had to figure out how to make my dream come true, how to make, this show turn into a reality. So I ended up pitching it to sponsors and advertisers. And I booked my own guests. And in order to have a successful show in New York, and eventually I syndicated it nationally, I had to get A-list stars. So back in I networked a lot and went to a lot of sports functions, and Mickey Mantle's restaurant was right in Midtown Manhattan on Central Park South. And I was able to get to know Mickey and the people that handled his career. And they were gracious enough to get him to do my very first interview for the TV show. And it's a classic, I must say. He was a great storyteller.
He was indeed, and what an incredible ball player, and gone too soon, like so many. Um, that had to be both satisfying and a little scary for you to start this career with a guy like Mickey Mantle, an icon, especially in New York. What do you remember from that interview?
I remember we did it way before happy hour. They made sure of that. He was always very good to me, very, very nice to me. And I did a lot of homework because obviously I wasn't around he played way before I started watching baseball, and I wanted to really know everything I could about his legendary career. And so I think he was impressed with my questions and the homework I did, my preparation. And he really was sentimental in that interview, Frank, because I brought up the fact that he lost his dad to Hodgkin's disease, and his son at the time was suffering with Hodgkin's disease. And when he started talking about all of that, he got very sentimental, almost teary-eyed, and talked about the people that he lost to that disease. And his son eventually passed from it. after, years after we had that interview. So he was just a great storyteller. And a lot of people thought that he and Roger Maris were intense rivals because they were going after the same records. But he and Roger were best of friends. In fact, he pulled out a baseball from the wall in the restaurant and read it to me. And it said, "To Mick, my best friend, love, Raj." He said he went to visit him every day in the hospital and they adored each other. So they were best friends, even though they were pretty much competing for the same records on the same team.
And I could ask questions forever about your early career, but we want to talk about this book, which is really exciting. Again, it's Life on the Green: Lessons and Wisdom from the Legends of Golf. When did you decide this is a book that needs to be written, and I'm the one that's going to do it?
Well, I honestly wanted to write a book about all those sports legends I just told you about. All, the baseball legends and the basketball legends, and include the golf legends that I interviewed. And the publisher said, "We love your work in golf. Would you consider doing a golf book?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so it was a kind of a change of plans. But once I got into it and decided the 12 personalities that I would interview and did those interviews, I mean, I obviously know all of them through years and years of covering golf for WFAN in New York. I'll be covering my 26 Masters coming up in April. But yeah, I just decided, let's do a golf book and let's make it positive. And happily, I think it is. I think, these life wisdoms, Jack Nicklaus talks about integrity and family first. He's such a great family man, and had the opportunity to sit next to Barbara Nicklaus at the Cognizant Classic last week. I was the keynote speaker to 250 women in this women's leadership forum, and Barbara was there, and we celebrated her birthday that day. And they're just so philanthropic and such a pleasure to know. And so everybody in the book has so many great stories, Frank. If you're a diehard golfer, you're going to learn some new material on all these people. And if you don't like golf, you're going to cherish the stories, I feel, and perhaps take some of their wisdom with you on a day-to-day basis. So I just really got into it, and I'm so proud that I actually did this book. Hopefully I'll be able to do the third book one day and talk about the stories behind the sports interview show.
I noticed a comment from Jack, since you mentioned his name, something about when in his humility, he said something to the effect that I realized I got famous for making a couple of 4-foot putts or something like that.
Exactly.
Remarkable.
Because, Jack really prioritized his family and still does. He has 5 children, 22 grandchildren, 3 great-grandchildren, and golf is important to him, but it's not as integral as his family. He said golf has given him the lifestyle that he enjoys today, obviously, because he was able to make a couple 4-foot putts, but he really believes that being a father comes ahead of chasing trophies. So that's the kind of person Jack Nicklaus is, and Barbara. They're just a pleasure to know. They're so charitable, and he really values his family more than anything.
We had a chance to interview him a couple of years back. We honored him at an event out here at Pebble Beach. But at the time, he said, "I'm not playing much golf now. I play a little more tennis." But for a man that's considered the greatest golfer ever, to let that casually roll off his lips and then in the next breath talk about his family, you're absolutely right. That's where his focus is, and that's where his love is.
Well, many years during the prime of his career, he'd be leading a tournament in the 3rd round, leave the tournament, no matter where he was, fly to Florida to make a son's football game, then fly back to the tournament and, the next morning and finish the final round. I mean, it's hard to do that, but he was able to make time for his family. And to him, that's his greatest legacy, his family, not the many countless trophies that he has in his office and in his house.
You write about Jan Stevenson, and you talk about somebody that helped to put the LPGA on the map, but that was tough for her to be what was considered by some, to be too sexy for the sport of golf, and for her to kind of go through what she went through to in fact, make the LPGA a household word at that point. Was remarkable, her story as well.
Sure. Jan Stevenson came to this country from Australia as a beautiful, blonde-haired, blue-eyed golfer with a lot of talent. And the LPGA used her to promote the tour. She pretty much became the sex symbol of the LPGA, the face of the LPGA. You remember the poster of her in the bathtub full of Max Fly golf balls,
Yeah.
and it was quite controversial back then, and much to the dismay of her colleagues on the LPGA tour. So, she had admitted to me, she said, boy, if I had done less of that promotional work for the LPGA tour, I could have won more titles. And she didn't think she was going to get into the Hall of Fame because she irritated a lot of people in the golf business by doing that. She thought she was doing the right thing and saying yes to the LPGA Tour commissioner and promoting the tour. Well, thankfully, she did get into the Hall of Fame. It took her a while. She didn't get into the Hall of Fame until 2019. But she has a great story. She really does. She's had a life full of ups and downs. She got mugged in a parking lot in Miami, and it permanently damaged her hand. And so even to this day, she doesn't have feeling in 3 of her fingers. I had the opportunity to play with her a couple of weeks ago in Tampa at a celebrity tournament. And, you can tell she still doesn't have the feeling in her left hand. But I'm sure there'll be a movie done about her one day because her life is perfect for that. She has so many great stories to tell, and she's a joy to know.
Tom Watson is one of the folks in your book, and one of the things people might be interested in is you write about the issue that he had with Phil Mickelson at the 2014 Ryder Cup.
Oh yes, I was at the Ryder Cup. In fact, I've covered every Ryder Cup since Brookline, so that's a lot of Ryder Cups. But yeah, Phil has just been a very controversial figure in many ways. He's been very outspoken, and I thought Tom Watson handled that very well. Phil basically threw Tom, who was the captain of that Ryder Cup team, under the bus and was intimating that Paul Azinger did a better job as the Ryder Cup captain and had better strategy. And I just thought Tom handled it beautifully. And so we go into that whole episode in that chapter. And Tom has forgiven Phil. It was pretty critical and very public back then. But Tom's chapter is called Learn from the Best, Stay Humble, and Stay in the Present. And I think that's really great advice. And, he learned from talking about the best. He learned from Arnold Palmer. He learned from Jack Nicklaus, who became his rival. And he learned from the great Byron Nelson. And he goes into the stories of how he learned and what he learned from each one of those greats. So I love that chapter on Tom Watson.
I suppose if you're going to have some idols, those 3 are pretty good, huh?
Absolutely. That's smart. A very wise person will learn from the best. I love that advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Nancy Lopez, who's always been a favorite of so many. I love the way she talks about playing happy golf, and that's transferred into her life as well.
Yes, I love Nancy Lopez. She's very positive. Her message is just that. Stay positive on the course and stay positive off the course. And that is very, very difficult to do. As a golfer, that it's easy to get frustrated. It's the hardest sport on the planet. How can hitting a stationary ball be the hardest sport on the planet? Well, just ask Michael Jordan, just ask Wayne Gretzky, just ask Tom Brady, right? It is so frustrating. You have to stay positive on the golf course and in life as well. We all have our ups and downs, and I just love her advice. If you can somehow just remain positive, play happy golf on and off the course, that is just advice that I treasure and try to emulate.
There was one thing that caught my eye. Amy Alcott, as a youngster, used to sneak on to Riviera Country Club and and putt with Rita Hayworth.
And didn't even know it was Rita Hayworth. Her mother had to point her out. I mean, Amy was tunnel vision. She'd sneak onto the course and play with the guys, and she'd stay on the putting green through through all hours until it got dark, and her mother would come and pick her up. And her mother finally said, come on, Amy, let's go, and walk down to the practice green. And there is Rita Hayworth putting right next to her daughter, Amy. And she said, do you know who that is, Amy? That is Miss Rita Hayworth. And I just thought it was funny because Amy had no idea. A lot of celebrities at those courses that she probably played with and didn't know when she was young.
You know, it's interesting when you mentioned that you know that you had an equal number of men and women. I was surprised because as I was going through the names, they didn't jump out that way. But as we talk about it, it's the women's stories that I find most fascinating.
Well, thank you. Well, you know, they were all very open and very honest. Renee Powell. I don't know if you know Renee's story. She's the second female Black LPGA player after Althea Gibson. Althea Gibson, the tennis legend, was the first Black female to play in the LPGA. But Renee, her father built a golf course in Ohio with his bare hands, basically. He didn't want there to be any racial discrimination or gender discrimination. And Renee describes in detail what she went through as a child and you know, it's unbelievable what obstacles she overcame. But what a success story she has written for herself. She is now, you know, she's an honorary member of the RNA, and St. Andrews University even named a dormitory after her.
Wow.
And she's in so many different Hall of Fames. She's just a pleasure to know. And boy, when you think you've had a tough day, you have to read her chapter and to see what she went through, what she had to overcome.
You talk about Gary Player, and there's certainly a personality that you know was an incredible player and one of the big three. And even today, he's going to let you he's going to let you know how many tournaments he's won, and you know why it should be looked at it differently because he's won just as many. He's just a really interesting guy.
He is an international treasure, Gary Player. And I love having him on the show because he's brutally honest. He will tell you what he thinks no matter what. And that makes for a good interview, especially on my Talking Golf show on WFAN on Sunday mornings. So yeah, Gary has traveled the world, probably won more international tournaments, I know he has, than anybody in the history of the game. And he's experienced life in so many different countries and has so much to talk about, you know, what it's like on the opposite end of the world. He was very involved in bringing Lee Elder to South Africa for the very first time. And that was a real controversial move back in the day. So he goes into all of that in his chapter. And, you know, he's 88 years young and so passionate about what he does. And his chapter is pursue your passion. And that's the greatest advice. And, you know, from somebody who is so physically fit, he is, you know, he eats well. I know because a couple of years ago, I did a TV show interview with him and I was doing sit-ups and push-ups in his driveway with him. So to this day, he continues to play golf every day and he continues to work out every day. He's just an inspiration.
And the list goes on and on. You've got Dottie Pepper, you've got Padraig Harrington, as you said, and Annika Sorenstam, certainly, and Ben Crenshaw. And, you know, it's just a great read. And I look forward to actually being able to sit down with it. One of the things that jumped out is the life wisdom part that you talked about. And there's some quotes in there that I found fascinating. One of them was, always play like you're a shot behind. What a great way to look at you know at playing your game. That you know, as good as you think it is, you might want to step it up a little bit.
Absolutely, that is a great piece of advice from Padraig Harrington. And Padraig's psychology is if he's 3 shots ahead heading into the final round, he has to tell himself mentally that he's behind, or he won't close out the win. Everybody has their own way of winning an event or trying to win an event, right? But I just thought that revelation was amazing. And even beyond that, I just think he told me that he plays in fear, not just nerves, that he is in fear every time he goes to the tee box. Now, here's a guy who's won 3 major titles and all those victories and is continuing to play. And he is in fear when he goes to the tee. And so his message is embrace fear and nerves and make it work for you. He said it gives him adrenaline to focus more. So Padraig's an interesting guy. I just love talking to him.
And there's the advice that we've heard before, and probably hard to take. Learn how to handle winning, but more so learn how to navigate losing, because that's where you learn, right?
Yeah, most people will tell you that they learn more from losing than they do winning. So that's universal advice. And all these personalities came up with different themes that I focused on and I didn't have to coach them on saying something different than the other person. But then there are some of these universal themes, like learning how to lose. I mean, obviously there's one winner in golf, and you're only as good as your last shot, right? So all these personalities are very humble and stay very grounded because they know they're only as good as their last shot. Again, the advice is universal for all of us.
Speaking of advice, Anne, what's the best piece of advice you ever got?
Wow, that's a good question. Normally they ask me, I'm asked, what advice do I have for young people getting into the field? The best piece of advice I ever got. I just think I learned by example. My parents were my heroes, and they came from humble backgrounds. My grandparents on my mom's side were German immigrants. My grandparents on my dad's side were from Italy, and we just worked really hard. I think work ethic is the key. My mother and father worked so hard, and they enjoyed what they did. They were both college professors, and they were both very interested in sports, and they were both athletes. But I just think work ethic, I think there's no shortcuts. And I learned by example by watching my parents, and they encouraged us to pursue our passion. I think that's very important. As Gary Player says in his chapter, pursue your passion. You're going to work 24/7 anyway, doing something. You might as well do something you love to do, right? And they instilled that in our childhood and made it possible for us to pursue our passions. And in my case, it was sports and being an athlete and becoming a broadcaster. And I thank my parents for instilling those lessons and giving me such great advice growing up.
And as we started here at the beginning, we are here to talk about this incredible book that you've written, Life on the Green: Lessons in Wisdom from the Legends of Golf. And I'm sure that your parents would be very proud of that as well.
Thank you, Frank. I did dedicate the book to my parents and to my brother, who is a year older than me, and they're looking down from the skies, hopefully, and are very proud. And I'm just very proud of the book, and hopefully it will inspire everyone who reads it.
How do we get a copy, Anne? Where do we go to get our copies?
So anybody can order the copy. It's actually out for the public April 2nd. So it's not even out yet, but you can advance order it. It's published by Haverly Press and distributed by Penguin and Random House. And you can get it from Amazon. You can get it from Barnes and Nobles. You can order it online. And I'll certainly make sure the publishers send you a copy so that you don't have to read it online, Frank.
I appreciate it.
But you're ahead of the curve, and the book doesn't even really, it's not really available until April 2nd. But I'm so delighted that you at least got to read the online version.
Anne Liguori, Wonder Woman, we could probably call you that with everything you've got going on in your life. What a pleasure. Thanks so much for spending some time with us here today.
I really am just honored that you had me on your show, Frank. Thanks so much. And I'll make sure you get a hard copy so you can enjoy the book
I look
and read
forward
it
to
in
it.
your hands.
Wish you continued success and hope our paths cross someday.
Hope so too. Get them straight.